Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is another episode of Chatting with Asta. And this is a show basically to survive lockdown culture where I am making sure that people don't have complete social atrophy, which is apparently a new term. And I have guests from all over. And today I'm lucky to have an artist on the show. My guest is Cynthia Juhailey. She is an abstract minimalist artist. And yeah, welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Hi, Asta. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so excited to talk with you.
It's so cool. You're one of the guests that I've had on the show that I've never met in real life, purely because of the circumstances of this whole experience. And it's just so wild. I'm so excited to meet you because you're similarly having conversations and like getting to know types of people, exploring topics, whether they be taboo or you want to like just see where you feel. um, where does that drive come from for you?
Honestly, this lockdown has is responsible for most of that. Like all of us, I've made so many friends around the world just by talking about things that I normally wouldn't talk about out loud. The fact that I haven't been able to visit my friends because I moved to a different country. I'm in Canada. I haven't really had the chance to meet people since I've moved here because of this pandemic, and
Yeah.
all my friends live back in the States. Um, so through Instagram mainly, I've been sharing my work, sharing my voice through my captions or talking in my stories. And I've met people from different parts of the world that I'm just like, wow, this is my type of person. When this is over, I'm probably going to go visit them.
Yeah, I definitely identify with that. I guess it stems back to, this is probably aging me, but like back in like the dial-up days, I used to go in chat rooms, and before you were worried about tons of predators, I would meet people, and I'd be like, "That's so cool!" And like learn about just there, you would feel less alone. And so I feel in real life people might think I'm extroverted, but I think the internet is like, it's a great way for those people that are secretly introverts to test the waters of being social. And you create also this art that's like, your art is this minimalist style, right? It's like this abstract minimalist style, and it has like a soothing effect. And you've talked about like your connection to it being almost therapeutic. And I my mom is an artist, so I'm obviously a sucker for painters. But what,
I love that.
yeah, like what have been like your influences? Like what are your driving forces in your creating of those pieces? And yeah.
So it was pure accidental turning up to be a minimalist abstract artist. My abstract used to be wild in a sense, um, but I have like chronic depression and I have PTSD. So all of that really did take a toll in my body, in my mind, and I missed painting. So instead of being hard on myself for not finishing a painting, I just did what I could do.
Yeah.
And by making weird lines and shape, I was like, huh, that actually looks pretty cool. And I started sharing it, and people were liking it. Um, and that's basically how it happened. And I mimicked the colors I would see in nature, and I would put those on my pieces. And I decided to create a collection despite not being able to do what I normally would do. And
Yeah.
I've just fallen in love with the minimal process of it. The intention behind the art is really being at peace and being calm. And I feel like that really translates into where I am at my life right now.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for artists like you, like Rothko, like this layered simplicity. Because I feel like sometimes when you see loud art, like art that's like insistent or in your face, whether that be in the painting medium or a film, you kind of get jarred by it depending on your mental state. But when you do something simple, it draws you in to figure out what it is about it that's drawing you in. You're like, is it the paint strokes? Is it the color? Is it the texture? Is it like it? You know what I mean? Like I feel like that's something that your art kind of,
So interesting that you say that because I wasn't a fan of Rothko back when I was in school. I was going to school for art history.
yeah,
And there were two types of art that I wasn't a fan of personally, but I had to dive deep into them because of school, which was classical art and Rothko.
yeah.
I was just like, this is so minimal. It just feels like something is missing. Now I take it back.
Yeah, I had the same experience in college. I studied abroad in London, and I went to the Tate Modern, and I saw a Rothko exhibition, and they had this cool thing there where they let you look at an X-ray image of the painting, and the different tour guide things would tell you like that he would do this with one layer and then he would do this with another layer and but the effect ended up being this like pulling you in to like what is this texture, because when you look at, I mean, prints and scans just don't do Rothko justice, like
Yeah.
at all. So it wasn't until I saw it in real life and I was like, everyone in the museum is like
Yeah.
like what is this texture like. And also we also live in an era where people have anxiety, you know, they have chronic depression. I too suffer from CPTSD, and the sensory and the anxiety of modern life makes it so that you want things that just like fit with what you already have, whether that be aesthetically or don't cause more noise. You know, it's like the
Exactly.
Marie Kondoisms. You're like,
Yeah.
this brings me joy. Like, yeah,
Yeah, and I wouldn't call myself a minimalist per
yeah,
se, but I do truly enjoy what minimalism stands for and how it can bring peacefulness into my life, if that
yeah.
makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's very clear, and your candor on social media is really beautiful. I was just thinking about, you made a post not too long ago about like 10 things like about you people may not already know, and one of the things I was really struck by was you said like I don't speak Spanish like as well, and it's like something that's shameful, and I have the same issue. I'm a firstborn Latin American, and my parents came here and they raised me to basically not think of myself in those boxes. And so they missed out on teaching me some of that stuff. And I kind of feel bad that I can only speak Spanish when I drink, when I'm not thinking about it. And then other than that, like, yeah, so it's a complicated thing, right? Being a Latin American, and happy Latin Heritage Month.
Yeah. As my husband would say, he would just say, "Wow, you should hear her when she's angry. She's fluent."
Yeah, when you turn off the
The filters,
yeah,
the blocking filters that prevent you, that make you think, "Oh, am I saying this correctly?" Like once you get past that, you're good.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and it is a complicated thing. Also, I feel that maybe I'm curious your thoughts on this. Like, I feel like Latinas, especially in this country, are constantly put on blast about how to express culture. And I don't feel that white women have to do the same thing because they constantly take from our culture, Black culture. They constantly can like appropriate across the board. But Latin women, if we don't express our culture, if we don't do it loud and proud, suddenly we're ashamed of it, or we aren't it. Like I'm constantly told I'm not Latina enough, despite the fact that I could rattle. I shouldn't need to prove that, right?
Exactly. That is so interesting because, like, we were talking before this. You're not enough American, but then you're also not enough Latina.
Yeah.
And for me, it actually has been the opposite. For me, it has been more on the sense of suppressing my Latina ex because I'm visually not American, like,
Yeah.
well, according to them, because
Like,
in my eyes, I'm actually more American looking,
it's,
more indigenous. I have those traits.
yeah.
Um, but if I would like tie my hair up a certain way, or if I wanted to dye my hair brown, I would be told, don't dye your hair brown because then you'll look like other Mexican women. Don't tie your hair up because you look too Hispanic. And now I just think to myself, there's no hiding it.
Yeah.
I am who I am.
Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting to hear that from your point, because on my side, it's been, I'm too much Latina
Yeah.
just based on how I look, regardless of how I speak and how I sound.
Yeah. I've had this in different phases in my life because when I was younger, um, I had an incident where I kind of blocked it out, and my mom actually sent me a picture recently where I went through this really bizarre phase where I wanted to look like Halle Berry, so I got my hair cut really short in like fourth grade. It was like a really oddly specific thing. And I had this short hair. I'm in fourth grade. I'm in Texas. And I'm always outside playing with the boys. And I'm very, very, very tan. And my tan isn't white girl tan, it's olive, yellowish, golden.
Yeah.
And my mom showed me this picture, and I'm, smiling with that look. And she said that the reason that the picture happened was because I came home crying because I was told I was a dirty Mexican and that I
Mm.
was ugly. And I completely blocked that out. But I would get made fun of for those traits. And so I didn't realize, but that was directly related to why I stopped going outside, why I started, working on my speech so that it was as perfect as possible. And people would tell me all sorts of things about my parents and that they should go back home. And it's crazy, but I've gotten to experience both extreme white privilege now that I have a married white last name legally and I look blonde. And I've experienced mistreatment on the basis of xenophobia. It shouldn't be that way. And you're right. You look more American, more American than most of the people in this country. With the way that our climate has always been in this country, do you think you could be this white and survive in Texas? I don't think so. Like it's also weird that we have this month to celebrate a culture, and it just happens to be steeped in this like election year, and people don't know what to make of Latin culture. I don't think it's also too varied.
Yeah. It's hard. I tell a lot of my other Latinx friends, if you need to take some time for yourself and rest, because all of this is very stressful, and I would even go as far as to say it's pretty traumatic what's happening,
Yeah,
with the situation happening at the border and happening to us, um, and to our family members. I worry every single day for my relatives. Um, and yeah, it's okay to take rest. It's important too to take care of your mind. If you're going to go out and you're going to raise your voice and protest, just make sure that you're able to get the rest that you need in order to do that.
yeah, and I will say that for my part and some of my other Latin friends is this idea of we like have always live in a culture where our identity, whether it be the ethnicity or our immigration status, has constantly been at odds with politics. So for me, it's never been a time not to talk about politics. I was raised to never see it as impolite. It was just like matter of fact, like women should have rights to their bodies, like they shouldn't be forced to have hysterectomies in a detention camp. That's just what I think is just obvious. But it's interesting to me that I've noticed even myself and friends that identify in the same categories as me, I find that I've silenced my voice more than usual because of fear of family, because of fear of the family that I've had come here who wasn't born here, afraid of them being sent home or afraid of them being taken by ICE because, and like my mom became a citizen when after I was born and after my brother was born. And it's just a scary time. I feel like people don't realize what's happening in this country because it happens in the countries that my family came from. Like I mean, I think it's commendable that you identify and you accept your identity and you find ways to raise your platform, but it is that risk that we take, right, to speak up about these things.
Um, Not too long ago, I'm not going to say who it was, but there's a very well-known artist that I know, and this artist is white.
Mhm.
And this person was telling me and giving me tips and advice because I'm an up and coming emerging artist.
Mhm.
And she said to me, "Don't talk about politics." And I was just, in the back of my head, I was thinking, you know what, she's right. I shouldn't talk about politics because then that's going to affect my finance and who's going to purchase my art or not. But the more I thought about it, it just felt wrong because I don't have the luxury of not worrying about politics,
Yeah.
She may have it because, no one ever talks about her needing to go back home or vice versa, everything else in between, So for her, she could take that option and not talk about politics, but I don't have that luxury.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I get, whenever I do make any kind of specific statement, if I make a bold statement about a stance, which I think at this point it's human decency versus not human decency. I really don't understand it. But whenever I have made a statement, or even like this morning, I I get so much I get so much hate mail and so many hate DMs and things that honestly, like, I've just determined when I feel like speaking up based on if I can handle that much vitriol that day. Because some days I can't. I can't handle that much hate. And but you're right, it gets to a point where, I mean, if the Handmaid's Tale reality happens, I've definitely talked about stuff. Like, if we're going to be put in court for things that are unreasonable, we're women with minds. So it's
I'll
like,
see you there.
at this point, like, I mean, come on. I wore my pantsuit in November 2016, and I never took that pantsuit off, metaphorically, and there's no turning back. So
Absolutely.
it got to a point where I even had my both my parents kind of say, like, I know that you might be holding back, but don't worry. They were like, if something happens to us, like, don't worry. And that's where we're at. Like, people in your life that could be deported for erroneous reasons are telling their children, like, the future is worth more than my safety. And that's
It's so The fact that you're telling me that is my grandmother was telling me a story about her father. Her father was an indigenous man in Central America, and he hid his indigenous language and his ways in order to protect his family, which unfortunately meant that his children didn't know what tribe he belonged to, don't speak his language. And she was kind of telling me that story in a sense of, we're learning from that and we're not doing that anymore. We're going to be out there and we're going to be proud of who we are
yeah,
and where we come from. And we're not bad people.
yeah.
We look different, we sound different, but we're not, doesn't make us bad people at all.
No, and we're also a rich culture, which is like, again, why I go back to this idea of Latin Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, which are two different distinctions being put together as well, because you're identifying countries that speak Spanish with countries that are in the southern part of, it's just like what is that, what are we really saying? Because at the end of the day, it is such a varied culture. It is a tumultuous culture. You know, myself and you, we both have a little bit of Germanic in us. And
Yeah.
that, like, that inherently, and the fact that I have some European background with the Spanish and the Italian, I'm basically the product of the colonizers and the indigenous. And there is a conflict there, and there's ancestral trauma, which is something I've talked about with other guests. There is a need to prove yourself. And I also come from a family that, for better or worse, did not want me to know the depth of my heritage until I was basically a full grown adult and could drink legally, because
Wow.
it was just easier. And I know, I think that with my kids, I'm probably going to be doubling down and making quimbolitos like every day for breakfast, and like being like, here, let me get you this traditional Ecuadorian necklace. Like, I'm going to be like so extra with them. Also because I'm married to a white male. So it's like,
Yeah. And, I thought to myself, I would do the same thing with my children. I will raise them, you know, learning about their culture and speaking to them in Spanish, even though my partner doesn't. But he would do his own part because he speaks French. Um, but I think it would be so interesting if we could reimagine Latinx Heritage Month, because in part, I mean, this is an idea that I've had, is that in part it's kind of like celebrating a colonizer background, language, if you will, because there's so much of it. I mean, there's so much of our history that has just been erased that we don't know about.
yes. And you know, similarly to the kind of conversations that you have like around Black History Month, like the identity of not even knowing like what tribe you came from. Similarly, Latin culture is complicated because you have, like, I have parts of my family that are, you know, steeped in like Catholic background, which is obviously not the native religion of Quito. Like, you know, there's certain things where you're like, okay. And also there's steeped racism, there's caste systems, there's people who, you know, colorism is a thing, like the fact that my own mother is darker than me, so when I was growing up they thought she was my maid or my nanny. And there were certain things that, it's complicated. It's like this thing within Latin culture that you are born with a gift if you're passable. And I think that Black culture has the same thing. If you're light skinned enough, or if you have features that are muted enough, you might pass for neutral.
Hmm. And
So
you wouldn't have to feel the pain, or you wouldn't get bullied as much as someone who is on the opposite spectrum of you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a crazy thing to think, but it's true. But then they give me a name like Asta Maria, and it's like, well, there's a target on my on my back, whether or not they want that to be true.
I actually know a British Asta, so that I was just like, oh, that's cool. This is like, I've never met one before, and now that I've met you, I'm like, okay, they're just popping out of nowhere.
I met an Asta at a model call once, and she was like, "Oh, do people always say to you Asta basta?" And I was like, "That's not a thing here." Asta basta. I'm like, people will be like Asta la vista, like they'll do that, and I'll be like, it's a different spell. It's whatever. I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care anymore. It's
yeah.
it's not even a Latin name, but it's another otherism that I carry. You know,
Exactly.
other
It's
otherisms.
different.
I know otherisms very well in my life. I used to write down Mary as my name when I was like in like second grade, and my teacher was like, Mary, Mary, like looking for, they were like, there's no Mary in this class, and I was like, it's me. But I wanted to talk about you when you make your art, what is like do you have like a, you make it into like a meditative practice, so like what is like a typical like set in the mood for Cynthia, like when you're making these pieces, like you've come up with the inspiration, now what is like your workspace, like what is that
My workspace is a mess. Compared to my like very clean, simple art, my workspace is such a mess. which I've grown to appreciate because it just means that I have the things I need to create what I'm doing.
Yeah.
There was once upon a time where I didn't have the paint that I have now. I have great paint. I'm able to do stretched canvases by hand as opposed to buying them. Um, and my my process, it's very, I can't even explain it without telling you what it looks like. So basically, I wake up. The time I wake up is after maybe 10 o'clock because sleeping is just, I love to sleep. I need to sleep. So that in itself is a privilege to be able to wake up after 10 o'clock sometimes. And I go downstairs, I have my cup of matcha, I open my notebook, and I basically doodle. And
Mhm.
if I like my doodle enough, I'll come back upstairs and I'll either use a paper or a canvas and I would just paint the doodles. And I just let them be for a few days. And if the inspiration comes to me, then I will continue it. If it doesn't, I'll leave it alone. Um, I stopped feeling guilty about not finishing art pieces because that just shows that my brain is working and it's doing its thing. And if it's not willing to continue a certain piece, then
Yeah.
it'll come back to it when it's ready.
That,
Absolutely.
that's beautiful. I love matcha. Oh my gosh.
Me too.
Do you put like, do you have a special, do you like a certain milk that you like to use, or
So I switch between almond, cashew, or oat milk. If I want it to be more like frothy, I would use cashew milk
mm,
because cashew milk, imitates that creaminess of actual dairy.
yeah,
I prefer it to be iced,
yeah.
but when it gets cold, which is something I'm trying to get used to up here, I will just have it heated, but I don't use any sweetener because I love that bitter taste of matcha. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm the same way. But I also have like, um I'll have like, the seasonal flavor every now and then and like mix it with it just to like make it a little extra, or I'll justify sweetening it with like manuka honey because I'm like, oh, it's got the extra whatever you calls it in there, that antioxidant.
Yeah,
It's like, oh my god, I'll justify that, but I can't really deal with stuff that's too sweet. But that's cool. Your thing about unfinished art is interesting thing to think about, because I feel like with painting you do have to make that choice. Whereas like the industry that I most make art in is film. And I remember and there's a lot of misquotes out there. So I don't know if this is something she said, but there's a thing that said that Marilyn Monroe talks about art being forced in film because you expect inspiration and creativity and everything to happen scheduled. So scene one can only be shot in these hours at this time, and it's going to be perfect and it's going to be captured, and that's the only version of it that can ever exist, right? So we don't get to marinate on it necessarily as actors because it gets dealt with in the editing room. But as painters, like I've been so impressed with my mom. Shout out to my mom. She's worked from everything in watercolor to acrylics to oil, and I've been impressed with the way that she'll send me a picture of one version of the painting and then she'll sit on it, and then she knows how to correct depending on the medium. Like she can wipe it off, she can paint over it, and even like some paintings she's had for years that I thought were finished, she's like, I gave the woman a suit. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Things like that where you're like, oh, I decided I'm gonna make the fruit blue instead of pink. Like I think it's beautiful. And I guess the only way that an artist in your profession might consider it finished is if you sell it. And then it just becomes whatever that person decides it to be.
absolutely. I would love to see your mom's art. And
I'll
um,
I'll send you her website. But yeah, and what is that like, by the way? Like physically selling a piece of art that you like.
it is so hard. It is so hard to, be the person because I call myself a self-represented artist.
Mhm.
It's so hard to be that person, bargaining your artwork because in my mind, I feel like they're priceless and I don't want to let them go. But also, I need to make a living, so we'll
Yeah.
settle on a price.
Oh, well, that's yeah. I just kind of feel like whenever sometimes I'll send like a poem or something to a friend to read, and I remember so every now and then I'll like text them and they haven't read it yet, and I'm like, actually, here's a second version, here's a third one, because I'm like, I can't have you read it like that yet, and so I apologize to all my friends who read my work, and I send them like 5 emails, and I tell them to disregard the previous one every single time.
I admire poets so much. Like, I find that behind poetry, there's a lot of vulnerability when you're putting it out there.
Yeah, and it's abstract wording, it's expressive wording, it's playing with wording, and I find that that's kind of my favorite way to express
Yeah.
myself. But it is when I choose to share something, it becomes like a I'm trying to say something about how I feel about the world, so I'm sharing this with you. But speaking of that, what kind of message do you want to share with the world, the universe right now? Like, what's prescient in your mind?
I'm going to stick with the message behind this collection because it's just so fitting to me right now. And it's basically slow down when you have to, listen to your mind and body, and enjoy the simple things that bring you peace.
That's beautiful. I
Thank you.
I'm definitely, especially after watching the debates this week, I am going
Oh
to
my gosh, yeah.
I'm gonna like
Whoa.
stare at your paintings and just do one of these and
Yeah, I'll send you screenshots of everything. I'm just like, here you go. Like after a debate's over, I'll just send it to you.
I know. I even have friends offering like free yoga classes on Friday because they're like, pay what you can. I think we all need to collectively breathe together. I'm like, and
Yeah.
that's no matter what level of sanity you're at. Like whoever you thought was the saner person, like both it was just like I was like two angry parents talking, and I'm like a 3-year old all over again. So no, 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 no. But
Yeah.
I will take those words to heart. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Cynthia. It was so wonderful
Thank you for
talking
having me.
with you. Thanks again for joining me on another episode of Chatting with Asta. A big thanks to my guest this week, Cynthia. It was so lovely meeting you and talking, and I can't wait to talk with you again soon. And yeah, her message this week is, slow down when you have to and listen to your mind and body and just find ways to make peace. And, my advice is to look at some of her art for a start and maybe a matcha latte. Anyway, you can check out more episodes by shuffling the playlist here on YouTube if you're watching. And if you're listening, you can scroll on through, look at past episodes. There's plenty of great voices to hear, whether that be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or iHeartRadio. See you guys next week.